Welcome back to T24 podcast by Bunmi Odulaja, which caters for various aspects of your life. As a single or someone who is in a relationship that you're hoping would lead to marriage. It's also for you if you're a married person. Parenting, it's also for you. So, this is the second episode in the series Boundaries in Marriage. I will be sharing with you from my experience as a certified counselor, coach, mentor, and as someone that's been married for almost 3 decades. I hope that you'll be able to take some points from the episode today. Right. As I said earlier, this is second episode in the series Boundaries in Marriage. In the last episode, we explored the emotional boundaries, why it is important to have a healthy emotional boundaries. We also talked about how emotional boundaries could be violated. In this episode, we will be looking at the second and the third boundaries in marriage. These are physical and sexual boundaries in marriage. Let's start with the physical boundaries. Physical boundaries includes the need for personal space, privacy, your comfort, such as comfort with touch and not touching. Also your physical needs. All of these come into the physical boundaries arena. Yes, the two have become one. However, you still from time to time need your personal space, even in marriage. In Luke chapter 5, even Jesus himself set physical boundary between himself and his disciples. It took our time to be alone. So it's okay to have personal space. Why have physical boundaries important, you may ask? Some people do need space to reflect and recharge their batteries. Quality time away for them is where they re-energize, they refocus, and they need that to be able to be a better version of themselves. It also provides the person with the opportunity to wait on God for his direction for them and for their family. Wanting and needing time away does not mean that they're falling out of love with you. It's important to know that. I know that sometimes, married people might think, why does she need time alone? Why does he need time alone? It doesn't mean they're falling out of love with you. It might just be that's how they recharge their own batteries. If you're uncomfortable with the thought of your spouse needing periodical time away for a retreat, it might be important for you to start to explore why you feel such way. I know that, from a counseling setting, when a spouse is saying to their partner, I need time alone, sometimes people might feel that there's a sense of abandonment. So let's look at that in a future series. But in the meantime, I would encourage you to seek support as to why you feel that way. How can physical boundaries be violated? Physical boundaries could be violated by various actions, such as shouting, raising your voice during disagreement. It is important that both parties are able to communicate with respect and maturity during disagreements. Unfair fighting also can be a way where physical boundaries are violated. Learn to fight fair. Know your fighting styles. We will be covering this in a future episode. There are two main types of fighting styles, rhinos and hedgehogs, but we'll deal with these ones later on. Making sure you're not punching below the belt even when you're angry. Yes, you might have been hurt. Yes, you might feel like you want to lash out, but care must be taken not to damage your relationship in the heat of the moment. I covered this extensively in my series, Conflict Resolution. Invading your spouse's personal space. This might be you standing very close to your spouse in an intimidating and threatening manner, pressing your body against them or standing too close to them such that they are unable to move or walk away from an argument. Being denied of your physical needs. This could be your basic needs, food, warmth, safety. I know from counseling a lot of women, I know that some women, when they're in conflict with their husbands, and they know that this man cannot boil an egg to save himself, they might not cook for their husbands because they're angry, because they're in disagreement with them, and therefore denying him of his physical need. We're not going to go and talk a little bit about that at this point in time. But another thing that happens is that when married couples are in disagreement, sometimes they withhold sexual intimacy with their spouse. And they use this as a weapon. Remember that sex within marriage is a gift from God. Again, I covered this extensively in my series, Conflict Resolution. Physical abuse, this boundary line should never, ever be crossed in any relationship. You need to know your limits. You need to know where to draw the line. Have a timeout if you need to have that. Respect the other person's space. If one of the parties wishes to take time out to calm down, this must be respected. I know that sometimes when one of the parties is saying, I need to stop this conversation, the other person is thinking, no, we need to finish the conversation. But again, I covered this extensively in my series on conflict resolution. Yes, we're all human. Yes, we do get angry, but it's not an excuse for physical boundaries being violated. I'm going to give you some scriptures that talks about how we should conduct ourselves in such situations. The first scripture I want to read to you is in Proverbs 14:29. He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. Let me read another scripture. Again, Proverbs is the book of wisdom. Proverbs 19:19 says, hot-tempered people must pay the penalty. If you rescue them once, you'll have to do it again. So it is important that even when you are angry, you are able to maintain a physical boundary in your marriage. Very important. Now, let's look at the third boundary. The third boundary, as I mentioned earlier, is sexual boundary. Like every other boundary in marriage, sexual boundary is one you need to be clear on from the onset of your relationship. To be honest, it should have been discussed within your premarital marriage course, if you had one before you got married. So what is sexual boundary? This is how far you are willing to take what you do sexually and physically. It is important that you communicate and agree your sexual boundaries with your spouse. Be clear on what the preferences are. Be clear on how much of a wiggle room for experimentation exists. Deciding what you're comfortable with is important. Knowing what you like and what you don't like might take time and exploration. If your spouse doesn't know what your sexual boundaries are, one or both of you might become unhappy or unfulfilled. Good communication and what I deem holy self-control in this act of intimacy is important. Communicating with your spouse and taking time to talk about this outside of the bedroom is very important. Be a considerate lover. Understand that men and women are wired differently. It is commonly said that when it comes to sex, men are like gas cookers. Turn it on and it's a full blast, and once it's done, it's done. It gets cold and quickly evaporates. While on the other hand, women are described as electric cookers. They start off slower. It takes time to get them to full blast. And when it's done, it also takes a bit of time for it to cool down. Understanding that there are differences in season of marriage is also important in this regard. There might be periods in your marriage when you are not as sexually active or available as your spouse might want or expect. This might be due to pregnancy or health issues. Good and open communication will be essential in this season of your marriage. Remember that boundaries and preferences can change, so be prepared to have open dialogue about this. Let's move on very quickly. How can sexual boundaries become violated in a marriage? Forcing your spouse to carry out a sexual act they're not comfortable with. Using sex as a weapon. Withholding sex, except by agreement for the season of fasting, is a form of punishment and is also a form of manipulation. One thing that you have to look at is if there are past hurts, if there are issues going on in the marriage that is affecting your level of intimacy, take out time to deal with those issues and get them resolved. Sex is not what we call, what I've themed wombed, which is a weapon of mass destruction. Don't do that. Another point here is how can sexual boundaries be violated? Is being forced to have sex. This is marital rape. As you know, if it's not consensual, it is rape. And it is a form of domestic violence. I can speak about this from a UK law perspective. It is set out in the law in the UK Sexual Offences Act 2003. And I know that in most countries, they have their own versions of this. It is important and it's very serious. Sadly, it is still happening in this day and age. I had to support a lady who had been raped by her own husband. He didn't see anything wrong in what he did. To him, she's his wife and he could have sex with her whenever he wanted to. He failed to realize that she is not his property and lacks respect for her. And we had to deal with that with the police. It wasn't pleasant. Another way that it can be violated is using pornography as an escape. This will negatively affect your ability to engage in a healthy sexual behavior. You have to understand that pornography is staged. It's designed for an audience, right? Discuss your expectation and desires with your spouse. Seek professional support and help if you need it. rather than resolving to using pornography as an escape. The other thing I want to cover here is physical affairs. This is whenever a person engages in any form of romantic and intimate act that involves physical contact with someone who he or she is not legally married to. This ranges from kissing to full-blown sexual intercourse. It will be important to seek support from trained counselor or your local church. The wound of an affair would take a long time to heal. To be honest, it can only be healed with the help of God. The impact of betrayal and disrespect can be long-lasting. Finally, let me give you some couple of scriptures here on sexual boundaries. 1 Corinthians 6:18 in the Amplified says, "Run away from sexual immorality in any form, whether thoughts or behavior, whether visual or written. Every other sin that a man commits is outside of the body, but the one who is sexually immoral commits sins against his own body." 1 Corinthians 10:23 says, "I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficiary. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive." If you have had boundary violated in your marriage, or the content of this podcast has triggered you in any way, please seek the support of a trained counselor or someone from your local church. Thank you for listening to the second episode in the series, Boundaries in Marriage with Bunmi Odulaja. I'll see you in the third episode.